Let me just take over. So as Ian said, so thank you for attending our webinar. So obviously this is aimed at UK policing as your London zone. I think we may have a couple of attendees who do sit outside of the policing sector. So again, thank you for joining us. I think the messages that we will be talking about today will specifically be around policing and also obviously the NEP blueprint, but a lot of these will actually resonate very well with them, with any organisations, any clients that do sit outside of policing. So thank you for joining us this morning. Just go through a quick agenda. So Ian's obviously been through some of the webinar rules. I think from a housekeeping point perspective, obviously I'm working from home. I'm not expecting any deliveries this morning, so hopefully the doorbell won't ring. I've got my phone on mute, so my doorbell will hopefully not alert me when there's somebody outside. But just to let you know, I do have a dog. He is a cockapoo and he has taken on the role of a guard dog. So he likes to tell me when there's a leaf blown outside in the garden. So hopefully he's going to be sound asleep for the next hour. So just quickly as well. So I'm Caroline Suter. So I've recently just been appointed UK policing lead here at risual. I do look after quite a few forces direct. We have another lady, Abby, who looks after about 7 or 8 forces as well, and we work together to drive the engagement that we have with the UK policing. And Ian Stretton has been working very closely with a few customers around cloud transformation propositions, and Ian sits within our advisory and management team as an enterprise architect. I'll quickly run through a risual overview and some of our credentials. And then Ian is going to dive into the NEP Azure London zone. So hopefully the bulk of the material today will be really focusing in on how we can help you with Azure. So quickly moving on to this. So I think quite a few attendees actually have worked with risual in the past. But just a quick reminder, we are a UK-based organisation based out of Silicon Stafford, which is where our headquarters are. Very much Microsoft focused, gold partner across 15 categories. Last year, we were awarded the Azure Expert MSP, which places us in the 0.002% of Microsoft partners globally, which means that we are recognised fully for the credentials that we have within the Azure space. This year was our 15th birthday, and I'm glad to say that the organisation has been going from strength to strength. And as I said, you know, if you have worked with us in the past, you'll know of the culture that we have at risual as one of really embracing our clients and really helping our clients with on transformation journeys. So moving on to a little bit of what we do. So really focused in on cloud transformation, business transformation and digital transformation, and really understanding that customers come at their transformation journey from different angles. So we have customer journeys that we take customers on, which really helps customers to understand where you are within a particular journey, and also where there are other propositions that we can help you with to really start to bolster that journey that you're on from a strategic point of view, but also from a consulting point of view. And I think one of the things over the last couple of months when I've been engaged with customers, particularly around cloud transformation and the Azure journey, is really starting to dive into the skills, the education side and also the apprentice side as well. So that's really coming to the fore to really help to plug some gaps with some of our police clients as well at the moment. So our credentials. So I did a little bit of a quiz at our summit a couple of weeks ago, which we held virtually, and actually, surprisingly to me, I didn't actually realise just how many forces that we have worked with over our 15-year history. So we've been directly engaged with 40 out of the UK forces over the last 15 years at varying stages, some very, very deep strategically, some from very tactical solutions. As I said, we've got a long history of working with police forces and delivering that innovation and also those modern technologies. And we really understand where police forces are at the moment with, your cloud journeys, and also some of the issues and the problems, and obviously over the last couple of months with COVID as well, how this is all panning out over into the police market. Really focusing in on how we can help police customers to really understand what it means to be on that cloud journey, but then also to embrace other services where we can really start to help to deliver both operational efficiencies and optimization through cost management and increasing productivity as well. So Ian, I think it's over to you now. Oh, no, sorry, this is me. Sorry, apologies. Sorry, go back in.
Yeah, sorry.
That's it, sorry. So we just wanted to give a little bit of an overview of what it means from an Azure landing zone. So I think most of you are aware that the NEP have been working on the blueprints for the police in Azure landing zone. These blueprints are based on the Microsoft Cloud Adoption Framework, and then specifically tailored to incorporate the solutions and services that UK policing would need to be able to, in order to access both the NMC, but then also to give you that footprint to be able to then start your journey with Azure. What it means is that the Azure landing zone is going to give you that building block to be able to then start to realise how you can move within those digital police initiatives. And the way that we've actually looked at this is, this is a platform which we can start to help you to understand how to drive that strategy. And what will come out of this session is you will see and understand where we've actually been able to work with police forces to be able to deploy that as your landing zone, but then more importantly, what the next steps are that we believe are needed to enable police clients to be able to then take advantage of that investment in Azure. Not only Azure, but cloud, because clearly what's been happening with the modern workplace investment as well around Office 365, there's a lot of synergy between what was being migrated into the cloud so far as Office 365, and then where Azure can really help and bolster those services as well. So it's really trying to tie those both together to help our clients to be able to understand how to embark on that cloud transformation journey, but where you can really start to take advantage of both digital transformation and business transformation as well, to start to deliver those real benefits back into operational efficiencies and improvements in that service as well. And now it's over to you, Ian.
Thank you. Cool. Okay, so I think what I wanted to try and do in the sort of webinar today is give you just a bit of a flavour as to sort of what the Azure sort of landing zone is, and hear the phrase a few times, I think, over the next few weeks, months, as Microsoft, and they've only recently done Microsoft Ignite, which was obviously an online version this year rather than everybody going over to Florida or Vegas. But out of that, there's going to be a lot of content that now starts to sort of seep out, if you like, into the wider community. And one of the things that you'll hear all the time is Azure landing zones, and people preparing their landing zone and getting a landing zone and having a landing zone and all this sort of stuff. So I think what I wanted to do is really just sort of set the scene, I suppose, and give a bit of a history as to sort of what a landing zone is, where it's come from, and kind of where it fits into the grand scheme of kind of what you guys are potentially going to be doing with your transformation journey. So a lot of this is driven from, and I think personally, this is one of the best things. And I've been working with Microsoft for over 20 years on lots of different areas. But for me, this has really helped, and I think it's definitely helping customers, but it's also helping us as partners as well, is they've developed this cloud adoption framework. And is they've Microsoft have gone out and listened to their community. So they've listened to their customers, they've listened to the partner community, and they've gathered lots of good standards, information, some guidance, some recommended best practices saying, but there's no such thing as a best practice. It's it's what works for you, but ultimately things that people have seen work and it's worked for them, then they've taken all of that good knowledge and learning and then created this cloud adoption framework. So and there is a very much an element of reality to it as well. I think sometimes Microsoft have maybe done these frameworks in the past and it's been the sort of nirvana situation that Microsoft have sort of come from and expecting you to go to. This cloud adoption framework, as I've been through it, and I've been through it a number of times now with a number of clients, is very much real world, and it really does help you to get on to that cloud transformation journey. So what is the cloud adoption framework? So it's basically a gated step by step or phased process in order to get you into cloud adoption, really, and how you can move services out to the cloud. So it starts off with strategy, starts off with trying to understand, in most of your instances, the forces, motivations for wanting to move to the cloud. Is the data centers that need to be closed, on-premise data centers at the moment that need to be closed for whatever reason? Is there cost savings to be had or needed? End of life hardware that's coming up for renewal, instead of replacing them, could we look at doing something else? So it's trying to really understand what are the motivations for making this journey to the cloud, and also is cloud viable? So again, the business outcomes as well as something else. So doing a bit of analysis to make sure that it's cost effective for a force or for an organization to start moving their services to the cloud. That's absolutely what that strategy phase is going to seek to try and achieve. So the other thing it's going to try to do as well in that strategy phase is make sure that if there's multiple possibilities for moving to the cloud, it's choosing the right one first, so that you don't try and maybe break off more than you can chew. It's making sure that the project that you pick is going to give something back to the organization, but also give you some really good learning as to how you can then learn from that experience and do some other services as well. So that's the strategy phase. The theory is that you then move into more of a planning phase. So you've then got at this phase the recommendation, if you like, is to really look at what your current digital estate looks like and how can you rationalize that estate. And again, if it was to move to the cloud, what would that look like? What would that cost? Because again, that's something else that when you're doing some of these services on-prem, you're kind of looking at maybe buying kit or software that's going to last for sort of multiple years, 2, 3, 5 years generally, maybe 10 years. What does that look like in Azure, or what does that look like in the cloud? It's very much changing the costing models to, you buy for, or you pay for what you're using at that time. So it's trying to understand what does that look like. In the plan phase as well, we very much look at the organization skills, and we look at like a skills readiness plan. So again, it's making sure that the people who are going to ultimately look after and manage and monitor the sort of whatever the new cloud environment looks like, have you got the skills to be able to do that? And if you haven't, hopefully people like us as partners can help you to get upskilled. And while that upskill is going on, if there's still things that you need to do, it's maybe where we can provide services to sort of do some of the build and the design and the deployment for you while you potentially get up to speed internally. So that's the plan phase. Then you've got this readiness phase, and this is where excuse me, this is really where that sort of landing zone comes in. So the readiness is all about getting prepared, and I'm going to maybe use a bit of a football analogy for sports fans as we go through these next few slides. But if you think of this readiness phase, is almost like if you're setting up a football game, it's getting your pitch ready. So it's cutting it, it's putting the lines down, it's getting the goals ready, putting the nets up, that kind of stuff. So this readiness phase is really in a cloud situation. It's making sure that you've got your Azure tenants in place, you've got your subscriptions, you've got all the governance ready for you to then move into, and that's your readiness, and that's where the user fits in. Then you've generally got two paths, I say, but that's not to say that they're mutually exclusive. They're not. You can do both of them, but most people that I'm kind of coming across, most people I'm working with, you're generally going to go down either a migrate phase, which is where you're trying to modernize existing workloads and move them to the cloud, or you're looking at using the cloud to innovate and to provide new opportunities, I suppose, and new services that you want to offer out to your end users or to your customers, or obviously the general public, I guess, for the police force. And then once that's done and you've kind of done that migration, you've got the governance and you've got the management phases afterwards. So obviously the governance is all around, what the benchmarks, how do you fit into certain benchmarks? How do you fit into certain security standards like the UK government standards, the NIST standards, the NEP standards potentially as well, as to, have you got the right security in place? And as you develop into the cloud, do you continually look at that? And that's, again, the governance. And then you've got the management as well. So again, it's looking at, how is it performing? What's the management baseline? Once we moved it in, it performed like this. Can we improve it? Or if we make changes, did it improve? Did the improvements make any, did the optimization rather make improvements and cost savings? And is it still performing as we need it to do? So that's the manage phase. But the whole point of that is, the theory is, if you flow through that, you should have a good, successful cloud adoption. And the other thing as well, just to say, you kind of continually go back around this loop. So once you've done it once, maybe as a particular project, then you can do it again for another cloud project and go through that, depending on how you use it. So where does the NEP and the Azure landing zone squeeze into all of that? So as I say, the theory being that the landing zone itself is part of that sort of readiness phase, that sort of third phase in. So the landing zone itself, bit of a diagram on the right hand side, I'll come through that in a second, but essentially the NEP version of the landing zone has been defined by the National Enablement Programme for UK Police Forces. So for any of those on the call that have been through the Office 365 sort of versions of that, it's very similar to that. So it's some guidance, some standards that the NEP have defined for Azure, and it's implementing those so that you've got some, as I say, good standards and good some good governance. So we deploy it through Azure DevOps, or it's recommended to deploy it through Azure DevOps. So again, if you haven't got Azure DevOps at the moment, this might be something that's new to you. It hopefully is something you might want to use DevOps for other things as well. So for other service development, for other application development, if you've got areas within the forces or the organizations that you do your own internal application development, absolutely Azure DevOps is something you could also then use that for, but you're definitely going to use it for this landing zone. It uses some technology which is called Azure Blueprint and Azure Policy. So Azure Blueprint is kind of, as it says on the tin, really, it's a bit like if you're going to build a house. Or actually, if we use the football analogy, the blueprint, if you like, is the rule book. It's the FA rule book. So it's defining how the game should be played. It's the same with the blueprint. It's defining how the landing zone should be created. And then you've got your policies, which is your sort of FA committee, if you like. It's making sure it's some people that are going to watch over what's going on the football pitch and make sure that it's done correctly, and then they'll fine people if they do it wrong, for example. Again, the Azure policy is going to do that. It's going to look at your environment, not just once it's built, but as it continues to then run to make sure it maintains its security and compliance. What does it actually come with? So as I say, the diagram on the right hand side is sort of a graphical representation that's been provided by the NEP. So thank you. I'll make that clear now, just in case anybody thinks it's risual IP. That's not. It's actually that's directly from the NEP. What does it include? So you've got a structure of management groups. For anybody that does know Azure, it's Azure management groups, and you have a root level, then you've got production, non-production management groups. So they're already setting it already, so you've got multiple areas to sort of build into. Got RBAC, again, most people in Microsoft world will know role-based access control. So it's a set of defined policies that allow people to control certain elements of the solution. You've absolutely got that in Azure. So obviously this is some standards as to how you should manage the Azure environment. You've then got a few resource groups, initially 3, and you can see into those 3 resource groups, you've got an Azure Key Vault, some Azure storage with an Azure storage account, and then you've got log analytics and security center and Sentinel, which I'll come on to in a second. But all of those, again, are set up in a particular way, so going to do particular roles for you. And then that's not to say that you can't then use those services for other things. So if you've got something you might want to do with certificate services, for example, then Key Vault is definitely something you could also then use to do those services with. So I did just touch on the sort of log analytics and Sentinel. So included in the sort of setup, as we just touched on, if you think of that sort of little diagram that's on the left-hand side, this is the diagram on the right-hand side here is zoomed into that, if you like, so into that resource group, sorry, where the Sentinel icon was. This is that, but zoomed in a little bit further. So this is going to provide you a SIEM and a SOAR solution, so a security information and event management solution and a security orchestration and automated response solution. In a nutshell, Azure Sentinel. So I know from speaking from some of the police forces, the NEP or the NMC, which is the National Management Centre as well, you're already using QRadar, and I think you've got some QRadar maybe appliances on your environment, which is collecting logs and then passing that up into a sort of a wider QRadar solution, which the NMC are looking after. This is basically that again. But it's doing it through Azure, which is going to provide obviously all the logs and everything that's coming from Azure. And as you can hopefully see in the diagram, it's also going to take the logs from on-premise and also from the cloud. Now, a lot of people will be thinking straight away, well, hang on a second, do we need the 2 solutions? The view is, and this is still in its early sort of infancy at the moment, but speaking to the NMC, the view is that this QRadar solution with the Sentinel and then passing it through Azure and then out to the NMC, this will take over from your current QRadar. Now, don't hold me to that. Clearly, that's something you potentially want to discuss with the NEP directly as well. But my understanding is, and sort of Risual's and current understanding is that this sort of solution will eventually take over from the current QRadar solution that you may have only just deployed. I think a lot of people I've spoken to, again, it's only something that they've recently deployed. So you might be rolling your eyes thinking, oh, that's something we've now got to do again. Azure, what does it do? So it collects data and event logs from, as the diagram hopefully represents, not just cloud-based servers and services, not just Azure servers that you may host in Azure, but it also will connect to your on-premise systems, your Windows boxes, your Linux boxes, your proxy servers, etc. There's lots, and it will suck those logs up, put them into Azure, and then you can do analysis, threat management, and do your orchestration off the back of that as well. So you can go and get activities to take place and happen off the back of an event happening. The other thing you've got, of course, is because it's going into Azure, Microsoft will use the logs that are coming through. They'll use automated intelligence and machine learning from, as you can hopefully imagine, the amount of customers that they've got on Sentinel at the moment, the amount of logs that they receive on a second-by-second basis, not even a minute-by-minute or an hour-by-hour, but certainly a second-by-second. They can very quickly start to do threat analysis and give you recommendations to say, look, we see this threat that's coming. We recommend you take these actions. And that's kind of going back to the cyber threats and all this sort of stuff that seems to be very much the fore these days. It's getting you more on the front foot with how you deal with those situations rather than waiting for it to happen and then panicking once it has. using Azure and Microsoft and some of the machine learning capabilities that are obviously provided by the cloud, it's going to hopefully get you on the front foot with that. So yeah, that's going to hopefully again come with your Azure landing zone. So yeah, in a nutshell, that is the NEP landing zone. But of course, there's a few things that aren't included in that. So hence the batteries not included. So if you think about maybe some of the things that I haven't mentioned. So in particular, we haven't talked about there how you would connect your sort of internal on-premises network or kind of your end users, your end clients to Azure. How do we connect to these services? That's actually not included in the Azure landing zone. Clearly, that's something we can help you with, and we can help you with all of these. But these points that I just wanted to highlight to you, that they aren't included in the landing zone. So they are things you're also going to need to think about as you do your cloud journey. So how do you connect your networks? There's also an assumption in the landing zone that actually you've done some of the potentially the Office 365 work, particularly around the identity, linking your identity with Azure Active Directory and SailPoint. I think is the other identity solution that's going into most forces as well. So it's assuming that that work has already taken place, because obviously Azure itself uses Azure Active Directory, the RBAC permissions, etc. will all use Azure Active Directory. So you know, once you've got that done and in place, then obviously the landing zone really starts to take more shape, because you can start to use real sort of user accounts rather than sort of you know, fake admin accounts, if you like. Excuse me. There's cost management and optimization. So of course, as you start moving into Azure, you're going to start paying for Azure. It's like I say, it's a different cost model completely. So what we need to be mindful of is how you're going to look after the costs of Azure, and we'd like to think, if you were to work with us, we can give you some tools and techniques and some knowledge as to how you can look after that cost and how you can make sure you are getting the most bang for your buck, if you like to coin an American phrase. Processes and plans for how to move over to Azure. So clearly the NEP guidance is only going to tell you how to set up the landing zone. It's not going to give you any recommendations as to how you're going to move your services from where you are now into that landing zone if you do want to go down that sort of migrate route. So that's not included. Any migration tools that you need, they're not included again. So it's just going back to the football analogy. It is literally just the football pitch that you're going to get. It's not going to include any players. It's not even going to include a football. It's literally just the pitch and maybe some goals. And essentially, if you think about it like that, that's what's going to come. An understanding of the deployment of log analytics. So again, you know, there's a requirement or a recommendation, sorry, not a requirement, that you're going to deploy the Sentinel solution and that you're going to connect it to your on-premises servers. But how do you get the agent out there? How do you know, what logs do you actually want to capture from on-premise? How is that actually going to work? How are you going to push those logs through? So again, there's in the guidance from the NEP, it tells you how to set up the first bit, but it doesn't then go into the full detail, as you can imagine, because every police force is going to be slightly different. How do you then connect the rest through? Again, we can help you with that. Backup and recovery plans. So again, once you've got stuff in Azure, how do you back it up? How do you recover from it? And then there's an inference that you're going to have a test and development zone, or actually when you look at the guidance, it talks about a non-production. But again, what does that look like? How do you manage that? How do you look after it? What policies do you need to apply to that? That, again, isn't included in the NEP landing zone. Looking after the production side absolutely is, and the policies and the settings and security for the production side of it is absolutely included, but not for the test and dev area. So again, we can help you with working out, well, do you still need the same restrictions? And if you do, what does that, what kind of things can we implement out of that? just looking at my screen is not currently showing the slide. Okay, right. Hopefully they're starting to come through the slides for you, Andrew. But yeah, we can send the slides separately as well. Okay, so how we go about deploying the landing zone. So apologies, there's lots of words on, and again, as Caroline's actually just just said that we will and we can send the slides out sort of after the event today, so you can read this in a little bit more detail. But in a nutshell, and just to kind of go through it quickly, if you were to work with us to deploy the landing zone, this is kind of our 6-step process. That's harder than you think to say. This is our 6-step process on how we would expect to work with you to deploy your landing zone. So the first stage would be that we come in and we do what we affectionately call an architecture design session. So somebody like myself as an enterprise architect would, well, I say come in. These days we might be doing it over a remote session, but we'll go through what the Azure landing zone is. In fact, before we even start on that, it's what's Azure? You know, what services can you do in Azure? What's it all about? How do you use it? And some of the basics of Azure. And then we go into the basics of the NEP landing zone. And what we try to do in that session is really highlight and kind of pull out the areas of consideration that you need to be starting to think about. The second stage is we'll then perform workshops to work with you to define, of those decisions that we highlighted in the first day or the first part, you know, what are those decisions? So things like who is going to perform the certain security roles. You're going to have Azure DevOps. What else might you want to use it for? There's naming standards, for example. So there's a recommendation from the NEP, but actually what is going to be the naming standards for you as a particular police force or a particular organization. So the second phase, if you like, is going to take some of those decisions and make them and then document them for you. So you've got a record of what was confirmed and what was agreed at the stage. Third phase is prior to actually deploying the landing zone. Again, there's this assumption that you've got some of the identity pieces already in place. So if you tell us that that's already in place, that's fine. We'll take your word for it. If you're not 100% sure and you need some checks to take place, that's what that third phase is going to do. We're going to check that environment, make sure that is good and sound and something we can then use for the usual landing zone. That one tends to be fairly quick phase. And then we'll move into phase 4, which is where we'll then come in and configure and deploy, the Azure DevOps first. From that, we then use the scripts that we've created and the blueprints that we've created and deploy those through the DevOps using a phased approach. And if anybody knows DevOps, it's using pipelines and repos to push that out into Azure. Once that's been done, we will then do knowledge transfer with you to kind of go through with you. By the way, as we do all of this, we'll be working with you all the time, right? So don't think this is being done to you. The theory is that we'll do it with you as we go. So potentially you guys even pressing the keys as you deploy this stuff. But once that's been done, once we've actually deployed it, step 5, if you like, is just to go back through that with you again, just to go and say, look, you know, what we discussed and designed in phase 2, this is how it actually looks in Azure, and just making sure that you really do get the knowledge and the transfer of that knowledge across. And then finally, phase 6 is if there is any transfer to happen into sort of a production support situation, whether that's an internal support service and IT function that you have yourselves, or, you know, risual, we do offer managed services. So if you wanted any sort of early life support, or you wanted any of risual to do any of the support for you, absolutely, that's something we could do as well. So it's the transition into either your support or a risual support, or although we wouldn't want you to, of course, but if you have got third-party companies that you use to do provide support services, maybe even a transition into them as well, so that they know what they're looking after and supporting for you. Caroline, I think, have you just taken back control? I think you haven't you?
Yeah, I've just taken back.
Yep, so over to you.
So just before I move on to these, I just want to, I was hoping that Ross, who I think quite a few of you know from Microsoft, was going to join the call. Unfortunately, he's been held up. I think I just wanted to touch on some funding routes that you may have been doing the rounds at the moment, and just to add some clarity. So Microsoft have a pot of funds which they are providing to forces to engage partners in actually deploying the Azure landing zone. And what Ian went through as that football pitch analogy, effectively what Microsoft will pay for a force to actually have deployed. I'm unsure at the moment as to timescales, as to how long these funding pots will be available. And whether they will be applicable to each force. I think it's all dependent on take up and also obviously Microsoft plans for Azure development across the police sector. But again, I'd be more than happy to coordinate that conversation with Microsoft. It's a simple process to be able to apply for those funds. In addition, Azure Expert MSP route, risual will have access to another route for funds, which again I can go through with you in a bit more detail. It's more specific to each individual force, but as I said, we can apply down that funding route as well. But we have already started that process with a number of forces. But again, as I said, it's all dependent on the scale of the work and the scope of the work as well. But we'll incorporate the additional services that I'm just about to talk about as well. So for those additional funding routes, we can help with a number of things where we believe, and again, that this will be plotted against the cloud adoption framework, so you can see how we can help you through that process. So where we have done these types of services before, but both with police and outside of the policing sector, one of the questions that we always get asked is, well, where do we start? How do we know where our priorities are with actually moving our services into Azure? And one of the really good processes that we can take customers through is what's called a cloud application analysis. That actually dives into applications in a lot of detail. So it not only tells you, what we're provided the reports through, the likes of Mover, and takes that data and really drills down into actually what that application is, right down to how many users, what the dependencies are, what the interdependencies are, how often that application is used, and what it would potentially look like when it does move into Azure, so you can really start to plot what your priorities are. You can do that on 10 applications, 100 applications. It's very much a sliding scale. But we find that customers who actually go through that process really understand the right way to be able to resize services once they are in Azure, and where you're going to get the benefits from. So a lot of the conversations I've been having with forces at the moment is really understanding from a business decision making perspective where your the low hanging fruit is. So what can literally just be moved and lifted and shifted, but not only just that, it's the reasoning behind why that can be simply lifted and shifted, and then the business decisions behind why some services maybe remain where they are. So we effectively take you through that process. Another bolt-on service is obviously the data maturity assessment around data and AI strategy. So this is obviously helping you to understand, the data that you have within the business and how to actually apply that governance around that data, but then to be able to put that framework around that data as well, again, to be able to make that decision from a business perspective as to what and how data platform will actually help the force to deliver that strategy moving forward. Move on to digital transformation strategy. So again, this is taking your cloud service and really starting to move it into that digital transformation. Security review and design, we have worked really, really hard with Microsoft over the last couple of months to actually build out an entire service based on security and threat management. And I know when we've been talking to NEP, this is one of the key things that they really want to drive out of this service, is really starting to not necessarily understand the security threats, but to be able to mitigate those security threats. So I'm not saying that there will never be a security threat, but what happens when there is a threat and how to then manage that moving forward as well. And then, as I mentioned right at the beginning, knowledge sharing and skill building. So as part of the process, always part of the process that you'll have with Risual, we will always do and aim to share information and knowledge as much as we possibly can through this process, but really understand that this is your solution at the end of the day that you need to own and drive forward as well. So working with our own education team, working with the Microsoft education team, we have a plethora of qualifications that we can recommend for you. But as I said, again, at the beginning, what is becoming more at the forefront is how to really plug that skills gap within each force, with potentially looking at the apprenticeship programme, which we're being able to build out as well through local colleges and obviously our own trainers and educators as well. So looping back to the first, so this is just a bit of a different way of looking at the cloud adoption framework, which Ian started off on. So as you can see, each of these areas is where we would recommend you really starting to focus in on. And again, appreciate that the writing is quite small in this, so I will send out these slides if you're interested in getting further information. But this really starts to bring it to life as to where you are within your cloud journey and the areas and the services that we would recommend that you really start to focus in on. This is obviously from a Risual perspective, but again, you may have skills in-house to be able to start to look at these areas and start to build it out. But please reach out to us if you've got any questions, and we can really start to understand exactly where you are within your journey, so we can really help to start. So we can start to begin those conversations as well with you. And then I think.
Yeah, I think
we've reached the end.
We have pretty much. So I really enjoyed that. So yeah, we've got a good sort of 10 minutes, I suppose, now to take some questions. If I allow attendees to unmute for a second through Teams. So I think if you've got a question, I think rather than then sort of verbally, if you want to raise your hand and then we'll come to you, and please feel free to ask your question by taking yourself off mute. Or if you've obviously got a question you prefer to post, then yeah, just put that in the meeting chat and we'll see what we can do to capture everybody. So I think actually, Ibby, I think that's yeah. If you want to take I think you just raise your hand. So if you want to ask a question.
Yeah. Hi there. So we've got some activities already going on at the moment in terms of migration of works. But the bit on the Sentinel side of things is very interesting, and we wanted to kind of know a little bit more about that. You've actually talked about the possible funding routes there as well. We have got a landing zone, and that will probably need to be changed somewhat to meet the requirements here. So that'll need to be to readjusted, I guess, to adapt with the new blueprints. Is that something you've taken into consideration as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, that's actually, to be fair, that's a really good point, and thank you for making that. That's something I didn't probably go through and touch on as I was talking about the landing zone. So while the landing zone itself is written in a way that it's really easy, I suppose, for a greenfield organisation or police force to deploy. So in other words, if you've got nothing at all in Azure, that's really, how it's laid out makes it really easy for you to get your first footprint into Azure. Now, if you've already got something in Azure, like a lot of you may already have, there isn't this idyllic solution where you put this in and then all of a sudden you're done and you're fixed, and there is a migration process, if you like, to go to it. So absolutely, for those forces and organizations that you've already got something, again, The inference is that you should be moving to these standards because, again, you know, the NEP are going to, or the NMC as well, are going to look after some of these areas, Sentinel stuff. So they would like some certain standards to be in place so that they know, obviously, that each police force is kind of to a certain level. But of course, you've got to get there. And again, if you've got live services, it might be not prudent necessarily to do that like within a flick of a switch. We might need to plan how that happens. So again, we can help you with that process as well. Definitely.
Okay, and what about the logs ingestion from on-prem into Sentinel?
Yeah.
Do you do that as well, or do you assist with that as well? We've got quite a few logs, and we've categorized, prioritized them, but it's a case of, well, what is it that's going to give us benefit?
Yeah, absolutely. So we can help with that. Again, there's some recommendations already from the NMC as to how to maybe limit some of the sizes and the amount of logs. Because again, if you think about it, it's in Azure, like I said, what you put into Azure. So you're going to pay for the amount of logs that you push through Azure too. So it's making sure that we're getting the right logs in order to capture anything that might be a threat, but not literally get everything so that you're paying, you know, millions and millions of pounds or whatever to look after it. So yeah, we will help with that tuning, and we can certainly help with the on-premise setup of that as well. Definitely.
Okay, and finally, do you have any clues, any ideas as to when and how when you said QRadar will demise potentially?
I don't think there's going to be a particular point in time. I think it's going to be as each force hopefully makes the journey over to Azure. It'll be each individual force that will decide, I suppose, when they go from one solution to the other, working with the NMC, of course.
Right, and but we haven't got anything on the NMC, so potentially.
Yeah, I mean, if you've got no QRadar or none of that setup at all, then again, like you say, this is potentially all brand new for you in that area. So they're actually building that right now, if I'm honest. So I think I was on a call with the guys from the NEP last week, and they're actually just sort of stages of testing it. I think they're doing some testing with, I want to say Derbyshire Police Force, but so yeah, they're going through some final sort of UAT and testing, and then I think they'll be ready. So I'd like to think sometime this month, maybe beginning of next month.
Great, thank you.
All right, thank you for those questions. Just to say, if anybody has got any other questions, again, this is still being recorded, so maybe I don't think, thankfully, release any sensitive information there. But again, if the questions you've got, maybe just make sure that they are not sensitive questions. Has anybody else got any others? I did see somebody did put their hand up, but they seem to have taken it down again.
It might have been the same question, Ian. Yeah, I think just to reiterate from what Ian's just said, so the plan is, not to ask you to throw away, if you've already made an investment in Azure services, the plan is not to ask you to throw away that investment and start again. There's plans and routes that we can take you on to make sure that that gap is filled with bringing you in line with what the NEP designs are.
It was Daniel. Yeah, you did put your hand up before. So Daniel, if you want to ask your question first, and then I'll try and answer.
Yes,
James
it was me. So it was sort of the same question that Ibby asked, but just to follow up. So you mentioned migration. So for those customers who already have, so in our case, we already have some subscriptions, and what we're talking about here is creating a new subscription. So
potentially,
two routes you could do with that. You could either take what you already have and make it adapt it so that it is effectively the same Blueprint would be providing, or we can create the new one and then move all of our services across. So do you know which approach is being looked at there?
Both.
Right.
There is, and that's why I say we'd like to think that at Risual we've got some good knowledge and experience that we can help you with that. The NEP aren't defining how you should. Okay. So I think that's probably the question you're asking is, do the NEP tell you which one or the other you should do? No, they don't. It's down to you as the force to understand what your own requirements are and how you basically would implement the landing zone. So if you think that's best to create a new subscription with all the settings in place and then move your services into it. That's one method, as you say. Or actually, could we just take your existing subscription and apply the policies, the governance, etc., that kind of comes with the landing zone and apply it to your existing subscription? Again, that's absolutely possible. And hopefully that's where we can give you some advice and guidance.
Okay, so the NEP is largely fine with how we get there. It's just as long as we get there.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, that's useful. Thank you.
Cool. James, I think, has got a question on the text on the chat. So, how would Risual help to support event sources that do not currently have native connectors within Sentinel? We have a key service where logs are only available via REST API. Is there a recommended approach to pull third-party REST API and push into Sentinel and log analytics? Right, good question. So James is absolutely right. There are some standard, if you like, connectors in Sentinel, or what they call the data connectors. There is what I would class as more of a generic connector, which is syslog or CEF, which is common event forwarders as well. So Sentinel does actually support the connectivity to both of those solutions, which, you know, I don't know all of them, but I'd like to think that sort of 99%, a bit like Domestos, right? It kills 99% of germs. I'd like to think that Sentinel, with those two abilities to ingest syslog and CEF logs, will take most logs and be able to ingest them. If not, then what you could do with that solution is potentially push it through to you can create what's known as a syslog forwarder. So you can forward the logs to that, which is basically a Linux box. And then the Linux box may be able to do some manipulation of those logs to then make it into a common event forwarder log, which can then be ingested by Sentinel. So Microsoft have thought about it. They have thought that, you know, it's not just them that create Windows logs and stuff, that there is obviously lots of other products and services. So I think, again, what we'd look at there is maybe come give you some support, some help and guidance, and have a look at what it is that those services are. But I'd like to believe that you know, like I say, 99% of stuff that's already out there should be able to forward the logs in. Hopefully that answers your question, James. Daniel, did you put your hand up again, or is it still just up from the last question? I'll take it. It was up from the last question, but if
yeah, sorry, I hadn't put it back down again.
No, that's fine. No worries. Cool. All right. So I suppose thank you for those couple of questions. It's coming to 11 o'clock, which is just the turn of the. Caroline, I guess we'll give them the offer.
Yeah, so I think I sent this out on email as well when I resent the link out. So as a thank you, and also as a follow-up, we've imparted quite a lot of information and probably given you quite a lot of food for thought as well. What we wanted to be able to do to help you to, you know, answer, you know, any particular question is to do like a mini ADS session. So our ADS sessions, architectural design sessions, usually last sort of full days when we do kickoffs. What we were saying is that we're absolutely more than happy to spend 2 or 3 hours free of charge, so we can actually help you to go through maybe some of your decision making and explain maybe some of the decision points with you in a bit more detail. So it's a way of saying thank you for joining us, and to and you know, and then to take it a little bit more specific with you. If you did want to take us up on the offer, obviously you can contact me. You've got my email address. It's carolines@risual.com. I'll send it out when I send the slides out as well. So please just come back to me, and between myself and Ian, we can it for you as well.
Perfect.
So